Good morning.
Good morning.
What would you like to talk about today?
Well, because of something that I did last night, I want to talk about journaling.
Journaling? You're kidding. That's like woo-woo stuff, isn't it?
No, I don't think it is actually, but I know that's a common misconception that it's a bit woo-woo, particularly in terms of sort of business. But actually, I think it has some really powerful benefits in terms of visualization and really refining the detail of your goals in the way I used it yesterday. But obviously a lot of people use it sort of more retrospectively.
Yeah, I know you're right. I'm just being a bit sort of devil's advocate here because I have used journaling and it's an incredibly powerful technique. And the only reason I said it's woo is that I've bumped up against this idea, and there's lots of great practical ideas in what a lot of people call that woo-woo space, and therefore they don't sort of investigate it. So I think we could play a very useful role here in bridging that gap between what is a very useful and practical tool that can be used in business and career professions really effectively, and take away some of that sort of pink fluffy attitude that goes with it. So I think we could do something really useful here.
No, I agree. I think first everyone needs to go and find a crystal that they need to hold while they're watching this thing. Kidding, of course. But yeah, I do. I think there's a lot of practicality in these things and in these practices that gets lost or just, like you say, just swept up in the whole woo-woo thing, and people dismiss it without giving it a chance. So what does journaling mean to you?
Well, a number of different things, actually. I've come across it in, I guess, two particular contexts. One, the first context I came across it was in trying to deal with the past, issues of the past. And there's another phrase that can come across as being particularly woo-woo in this context, and that is about healing past traumas. What I've come to see is actually, if you don't do this, what happens is you end up just carrying your baggage with you, and it affects everything that you do in the future. And to be honest, I now I really wish I'd been introduced to it, or should I say I'd been more open to it, because I think that would be a more accurate way of saying it, because it wasn't like I was unaware of journaling as a practice, but I was closed to the possibilities of it, is the truth. And it was only when things got pretty bloody desperate that it was like I was grasping at anything, and it was like, oh wow, this is like, okay, I get it, Sorry, go on.
No, I agree. I think I kind of not considered it, or it's something. It's one of those things we think, I haven't got the time for that. I haven't got the time for it. Too busy. Where's my downtime if I do that? And a bit like you, really, I think, because of circumstances that I was going through at the time, it was a big sort of savior for me in terms of just getting things out of my head, using it in a sort of a retrospective fashion of just getting my thoughts out of my head, because it's easy for your brain to get cluttered. Like you say, you accumulate baggage, and just getting that out, it's very cathartic, but it's also very useful in terms of clarifying and challenging yourself in terms of how you feel about things, and being more objective in many ways as well. Once it's out on paper, you can kind of challenge it and be more objective. I found anyway when I was doing mine.
So exactly the same. And it's like, there's something, and I don't know what it is. And I've done a lot of, I've done a lot of reading and researching around all of this sort of stuff, and I know you have too. But it's like, there's a barrier I found, that it's like, you can hold something in your brain, you can churn it over, but when you try and put it into words, it's like something happens. It's like the words disappear, or it becomes really hard to find the right word, or it triggers emotions and it triggers resistance. There's something that's incredibly powerful about writing something down that you've been holding in your brain. And it's easy to hold it in your brain, and it can be really hard to put it on paper. And so I think there's two things. One, now I understand why just like every person in this space says you must write this down, you must write. Well, I mean, some people talk about it as you did in terms of goals. But writing, and specifically using a pen and paper, not using a keyboard and like a pad or a laptop or something. It's the connection between the pen and the paper in your brain that is like the powerful thing. Sorry, I got carried away and like distracted
at the moment there, didn't you?
I did, I got into flow.
Right, and then, with your ink on your paper.
I was scratching away. Sorry, what was your point? I do apologize.
Well, I do think it's very I think it's a very effective way of organizing your thinking, challenging your own thinking, when you do it retrospectively. I mean, I journal every day, and it's just part of my routine, really, and it's a really useful part of my routine. And I guess journaling takes many different guises, as you've said. There's many different uses for it. And be warned, some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about that I've done recently with it, very recently, can totally fall under that woo-woo, side of the coin. But it's but I found it personally very useful. From a practical perspective of organizing my thoughts, understanding my thoughts, and often, again, more recently, letting go of some of those thoughts, because we do tend to, we're a bit like a magnet with some of these things, and we hold on to them and store them, and then they become almost how we identify ourselves. And there's more to us than the things that have happened to us, or the things that we've interpreted as happening to us. And so I've found it very, very useful, journaling every day. I've even done a letting go letter. I don't know if you've come across that before.
I have come across it, but I haven't done one personally.
I did that recently, which was very, very powerful. And it was, again, for the same reason you mentioned. It's very difficult. So you do have all these things that you're hanging on to. And then when you're pushed to actually put them down in writing, in words, and almost hang your hat on them, that's a really it's a challenging process, but I think it's an immensely empowering process in terms of just getting it out of your head. And so whilst I'm not, I think that the symbolism of the whole letting go letter, for those who are not familiar, you write a list of things that you want to let go of, or you write a letter to something that you want to let go of, and then you burn it. And that's it. And I think it's quite an interesting thing how you buy into it, because I was experimenting with it, I'm going to be honest. And what was really fascinating for me was I'd written mine in a list form, quite a lot of pages. Let's be honest. It's about 7 pages, something like that. Of things that I just held on to and thought that actually, are they serving me? Are they benefiting me? No, they're not. Do they define me? No, And so I wrote these things down. And what was interesting was I didn't want to burn them at first.
Wow. Okay.
And there was a resistance. An inner resistance to burning them. Where I thought, actually, I've written these down and I've clarified them. Pretty sure I've kind of exhausted my list for now. But there was part of me that thought, I don't want to burn this if I can't actually let it go.
Do you know, listening to you say that, I get it. Although I haven't done that exercise, I actually do get that.
It was a strange, it just sat there for a couple of days. And I was thinking, can I actually let go of these things?
And
I had to further rationalize. And eventually I burnt my hand as well, fat thumbs with a lighter, but there we go. But it was a really interesting process because of the attachment I'd got to these things that I thought would, defined me or shaped me or influenced me. So, letting go of them was a massive thing. And And you don't realize that until you actually write them down. So it's a hugely empowering exercise to do. And whether you burn it or you don't burn it, you know, it was just, for me, I wanted to go through the whole process.
Well, I think there is something in the burning, actually, because it's a symbolic gesture. It's the final act, isn't it? And you know, I've looked a lot in the last sort of year or so into where sort of religion comes in to things. It's something that I've always been intrigued by. I'm not religious. You know, we've had this conversation. You know, in fact, I'm anti-religious for various reasons, but I'm intrigued by the power and the role it plays. So, and and of course, there's lots of symbolic acts in religion, and rituals, and actually, there's lots of rituals around the world in different cultures, and there's some fascinating books about the roles of rituals, and so I absolutely get the significance of following through and burning it, and why there would be resistance to that. And I think, and when I was doing my journaling, what I really felt more strongly than anything was it was forcing me to really start to consider my role in the events that I'd experienced in life. It was like there was no hiding place. It was like, okay, actually, perhaps I was responsible for that happening. Perhaps I can't blame so-and-so. Perhaps I can't blame the government. Perhaps I can't blame the economy. You know, perhaps I can't blame, you know, my best friend who swore at me, whatever it might be, you know. And it was hard, you know. It was a navel gazing exercise, and I know a lot of people don't like doing that. You know, for that reason. But it was ultimately, when I got through it and did it, I think it's what would be described as a cathartic experience, though I've never really been sure of what that word really means.
I get you there.
Sort of a cleaning experience. And I'm very, very glad I did it. Cleansing. I'm very, very glad I did it, you know, because actually it's since then, through doing that, I've been able to make leaps and bounds forwards in all sorts of ways.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of these things all kind of, you know, we talked about, you know, religion, and neither of us are religious, but you know, I think everyone is trying to explain the same thing, just in different terms. And you know, we talk about, you know, NLP and things like that. You know, they're all built to try and reprogram, recondition, create a healthier mindset or you know, consciousness, if you like. And I think journaling is one of those things, for sure. For sure. And you know, it is navel gazing. It's more, for me, it's more mirror gazing. You do kind of, you know, I can relate to what you said about, you realize your role in all of that. And I think what it's helped, actually, with me personally, and the letting go letter kind of helped this as well, was shifting away from having that sort of victim mindset in certain aspects of your life, where things have happened to you, and you've not had an active role or an active involvement in any of that stuff. And it, you know, I think some of that is like a defense mechanism. It's like a natural defense mechanism.
Hugely. Like, absolutely.
Hugely. You know, how do I cope with this happening? Well, it happened to me. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't control it. But I think going through that process helps you kind of become aware of, you know, the facets of life where you are in that victim mindset, and helps you sort of recognize that. And as soon as you bring things like that into your conscious thinking, you can move away from it. You know, so that was really useful, I think.
Well, you've hit on something there, which is, so one of my I don't know how to describe, I wouldn't call him a hero, but someone that whose work I really pull on a lot is Carl Jung. And he has a couple of phrases which, when I came across these at this sort of period of my life where I was going through all this sort of introspection, etc., and navel glazing, navel gazing.
Navel glazing. That's a different one. Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a glass pane over my navel at the moment. So, yeah. So what he said something, and it's like relates exactly to what you just said. What he said was, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate.
Yeah. And
like when I read that for the first time, it was like, wow, oh my God, you know, it was like, and like even saying it out loud now, it still has a very deep impact on me. And the other thing he said that goes hand in hand with this, and this is the really, I guess it's just as important, is there is no coming to consciousness without pain.
Yeah, exactly.
And those two things, and I read those two things in the same book. You know, they were within pages of each other, and it absolutely blew my mind. And I could absolutely relate to it, because as I went through the journaling process, it was painful, no doubt about it. You know, because it was like I had to admit to myself those faults, those idiosyncrasies. You know, I had to admit that those people who'd like called me out, who I, you know, perhaps lost my temper with, you know, for whatever reason, you know, had actually been right.
Yep. Yeah. And you're it's a very confrontational thing, isn't it?
Well, it's self-confrontational, isn't it?
Yeah. Self-confrontational. But it's incredibly valuable, I think, and particularly with, you know, I mean, how do we relate this to sort of business and business, you know, because obviously there's massive benefits from that in your personal life in terms of, you know, keeping relationships healthy and keeping yourself authentic and keeping yourself honest as well in many ways. But it does work in business as well, in terms of all the challenges that, particularly with leaders, where they think like, you know, they feel like they're working on their own, or they feel like there's a disconnect between them and the rest of the business if they're the founder or the, you know, owner managers.
Yeah.
Just getting that stuff out of their head helps them gain just a different perspective, you know, if they don't feel that they've got the people around them to share that stuff with. To get that out of their own head, you know, and even if they just journal on their day at work, there's huge benefits for that in terms of clarifying thoughts, you know, understanding what they need to adjust, just get rid of. You know, maybe we should start business letting go letters, who knows? But
well, I think there's I think there'd be a huge benefit in that. And in a way, just to like try and make this really practical and relatable, it's a bit like cleaning out your computer, isn't it? I mean, it's like, you know, you work on your computer, you know, and it's like it builds up, and your memory gets clogged, and
it slows down
the disk, and it has to work harder to find all the storage space. It's got to work harder to find out where it's filed everything. And actually, your brain is just like that. And so, yeah, I know you sort of said it a bit jokingly about, you know, cathartic experience being a cleansing sort of experience, but actually, in many ways, I think that's what journaling does. It's a brain dump.
It declutters, doesn't it?
It declutters your brain, and then once you've done it and you've gone through the challenge of doing it, your brain is then working much, you know, from much more clarity. And it helps you to
and it has less noise.
There's less. Well, you know, this is the show where we get rid of the bullshit out of business, isn't it? So
that's less bullshit.
It actually gets that out of the system, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
You know, it helps you process that. So no, I think that's a great way of describing it.
Yeah, and so you know, just it's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, we used to, in consulting, you know, people would get emails, and they'd get an email and they'd have an emotional response to that email. And, you know, sometimes you'd get a knee-jerk emotional response that would be, you know, I'm going to respond right now and hit send, and you know, and then all hell breaks loose.
I've never done that.
I think we've all done it, haven't we? We've all done it in different ways. But I always used to speak when I was working with clients and they were, you know, encountering that. I would always say, look, write the emotional response, don't send it, just write it, get it out of your system. And then sit on it. and come back to it and look at it again.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, they'd go back to it and look at it and go, actually, you know, I've
Yeah,
really, you know, taken the bait on that one and not covered myself in glory.
Yeah.
And I guess that was, even back then, that was, and I used to do that and advise that before I started journaling.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a form of journaling.
It is, absolutely.
Getting that stuff out of your head.
Yeah.
And then just taking a breath,
going
away, and then coming back to it and revisiting and saying, actually, is that still valid?
Yeah.
Or is that still how I'm thinking and feeling? More importantly, I think.
Yeah.
So even that as a practice within business is really useful in terms of maintaining healthy relationships and not, you know.
Yeah, I think
emotional responses.
Yeah, and I think as I try and sort of distill this into, okay, what is the real practical use of it? For me, if I to describe this in absolute practical terms, it's about making sure that whatever happens, you know, whether it's on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, it's like you deal with it, you process it so that you don't carry it forward as baggage, and therefore you don't allow past experiences to affect the things that you do in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I did that for so many years. It's like, you know, this is what I was saying earlier. I wish I'd had someone who could have opened me up to this in a practical way when I was younger, you know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I recognize I've got to take responsibility for not being open to it and all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah.
So we've sort of been talking about journalism. Journalism.
Good. I got navel glazing.
Yeah,
journalism.
I'm on form today. Yeah. As
the place with this one.
Yeah, as Ronnie Barker said in one of his famous sketches, I'm having trouble with my worms today. So we've been talking about journaling from a past perspective, getting rid of the bullshit from the past.
Yeah.
But there's also the future context as well. It's like, one of the words that I use when I'm working with clients is what's your dream?
Yeah.
And that's another word that is very difficult.
Yeah, people get it.
It's like, don't talk about, I just deal with practical stuff.
Yeah.
But the reality is we all have a dream inside us. And if we don't actually acknowledge that dream and get it out, what happens is we end up doing the stuff that we think we should do.
Yeah.
We don't acknowledge the stuff that we want to do.
No.
And that creates a stress gap. And we see this time after time. So having talked a bit about journaling from a past perspective, let's talk about journaling from a future perspective.
Yeah. So I did this for the first time last night, oddly.
Okay.
May have influenced my choice of topic today. Maybe. But I came across an approach called scripting, which is around thinking about your goals.
Yeah.
And writing about them from a perspective of already having achieved them. So you're kind of in the present tense, or still writing in the past on occasion. Right. But as if you've already accomplished that dream and those goals. And I did this last night as an exercise. I think it was. I've been exploring lots of different things recently around visualization. Yeah. Just trying to get to the crux of what actually works best for me, because everyone's different. And so I've been dabbling with lots of different approaches, experimenting with lots of different approaches, and doing lots of different research in this space. And scripting came up as one of the most powerful. Oddly, it came up like 2 months in, so it just shows you how good my research has been. But
you know what they say. The teacher arrives when the student's ready. So
yeah, exactly. I totally subscribe to that. That came to me at exactly the right time. Yeah. And so I did this last night, and again, pen and paper. So I bought a separate book. Yeah. And thought, right, I'm gonna journal or script. Yeah. From a perspective of having achieved what I'm looking to achieve in the sort of the near term. Yeah. Future. And I wrote about 10 pages. It just spilled out really easily.
Wow, amazing.
The advice was to be as descriptive as possible. Think about the emotions as well, which is always interesting.
Yeah.
And because I like writing anyway, I think it played to my strengths and my interests.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
And so 10 pages later, it was a really powerful experience doing it. And what it did was it changed my belief level.
Okay.
In all of the things that I'm aspiring for. It did have an impact on my belief level and lifted it. I wasn't sitting there crying at the end of my God, I'm never going to do this. It had a massive uplift in how I felt. Not sure, I probably should have done it before bed, because then my mind was buzzing. But 10 pages. And thinking about the emotions, being as descriptive as possible. And I've done this with clients in the past, when people have said they're looking to have their dream home, or they want to exit their business and have their dream home and their car. You get them to describe these things in as much detail as possible. Think about, what does the door look like on that house, and which way does the door open, and all these things you do just to try and create that mental clarity. But it was interesting doing it from a perspective of having already arrived there, have it all, and hugely beneficial. And it also does force you to think seriously about what you're trying to achieve. Which I think people don't often do. And I think my advice would be in this space, because back to what you said about people doing what they feel that they should be doing, and then it creates this gap. I think anything that you're writing about from a scripting perspective, and I did put this into play yesterday. If it's not triggering an emotional response, shouldn't be on there.
Wow, that's powerful. Because, absolutely.
And so on that level, it was a real good sense check of some of the things that I'm invested in. And I was sitting there going, actually, I am invested in this. I really want this.
Cool.
And it opened that up in my thinking around how much I really wanted it, what it would mean to me. And of course, if you're doing something that's neutral, it's like if you're doing a vision board. Another thing I've been doing recently as well is vision boards. And if you've got a vision board that you haven't got an emotional connection to, or it doesn't have an emotional impact on it, then you've got the wrong images. And that's it's got to have an emotional connection with you. Otherwise, what's the point? You're just doing it for the sake of it.
I love what you're saying here, because what I think you're really talking about here is what emotional intelligence is really about. It's about that ability, willingness, never mind ability, to actually recognize your own emotional connection, your emotional state, not to be frightened of that, not to think that your emotions are like, oh, that's for wusses, it's like, and actually we've sort of touched on this in previous shows. So I've done emotional intelligence programs. I got accredited as being an emotional intelligence practitioner. And to be honest, for me, it absolutely got nowhere near really getting to the heart of what emotional intelligence is. And I think you just did. I really do. Because it
is that connectivity, isn't it?
It is. Because if you can't connect to your own emotions, then you can't connect to anyone else's emotions. And if you can't do that, you've got no empathy with anybody.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I'm not talking about being like a sociopath or a psychopath. I'm just talking about normal people doing normal jobs. I'm just talking about normal people, running normal businesses, having normal careers as managers in corporate roles or whatever they do, who find it incredibly difficult when they are in an emotional situation. And let's face it, that happens. Like if you're working 8 hours a day, you're probably in an emotional situation 7 hours and 59 minutes of it,
Exactly. Absolutely.
And if you can't relate to emotions, your own emotional state, and understand how that's affecting the way you are perceiving things, the decisions you're making, the choices you're making, and your behaviors, then you can't understand why other people are doing it. And bang, suddenly you're in a potentially difficult situation which could have been avoided.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? It could, and then it becomes baggage, and then it becomes something else that you're hanging on to.
Absolutely,
it's a vicious cycle. I mean, I've been, as I say, I've been doing this now for, and I have, for a few weeks.
Yes.
What you can't see from where you're sat is I'm surrounded by vision boards, post-it notes. Vision boards in two senses of the word. I have like mind maps of detailed plans,
right,
and then vision boards of just images that represent those plans. I'm surrounded, but it looks like I'm trying to solve a massive murder case or something. In the films where you see them with all their maps and stuff like that. It looks like I'm trying to catch Hannibal Lecter or something. But but they're everywhere, and I'm it's spilled out onto the wall now because something came to me while we were doing this call. And so I do think that's really important, to surround yourself in that stuff and immerse yourself in it, connect to it all emotionally. Because if you don't, then you don't care. Then what's the point? You want to live a life of not caring about what you're doing, or
I think
that's going to be a massive regret.
I think there's something else, and so I think what you've said is, like, again, I'm going to say hugely important, because I think it is. I think the way you just described that is immense, really, really powerful. But I think the other thing that goes hand in hand, and again, this relates to when we were talking about negativity the other week, and we were talking about how all of the sort of media messages that we get, through TV, through the internet, cinema, radio, you name it, how negative it is, and how that negativity drags you to focus on the negative that's going on in the world. It's these visioning processes and journaling processes and scripting processes that get you out of that and gets you to be able to envisage the world that you want, not the world that other people are describing to you through whatever their motivations are in bringing the negative to people's forefront. Because that comes back to the old adage that you get what you focus on.
Absolutely.
It's so true.
I saw an interesting video on Instagram. It was just a snippet. I know you're familiar with this stuff anyway, but Michael Beckwith, who everyone who's anti woo-woo is going on around and just hitting the unsubscribe button right now. But I'm going to say this anyway. Good. So he was doing his thing, and he's talking about that focus, and what the point he was trying to make is, your body and your subconscious is always listening, and it's trying to work on, how do I create the environment that you're asking for? And of course, if you're focused on the negative stuff, you're going to get negative. But his point, which was really interesting, was it doesn't matter if you're not focusing on your own negative stuff. If you're just focusing on everyone else's negative stuff, it does the same thing.
Absolutely.
And I could really relate to that, because I think, we've talked about this whole sort of race to the bottom situation. When you're in meetings and someone starts off with, I hurt my leg, or I hurt my back, and they're both like at death's door. And it was interesting, because that plays out quite a lot. We see that quite a lot, and we do focus on these negative things. But I don't think we fully understand the impact of focusing on that. News is one extreme. Curtain switching and looking at your neighbours who are fighting or whatever is another way of that showing up.
It is.
And it has a massive effect on our mindset subconsciously. We're sitting there thinking, God, the world is bad. Life is happening to me. And all of these processes, like you say, these journaling processes help lift that. I don't watch the news. I think Harry, my son, sort of delivers the news to me sometimes where he's watching it. On the internet. But I don't watch the news for that reason. I just don't. I think the really important information will find its way to me because it's important enough for someone to mention it. and that's where I live.
Well, do you know what? You know, look, we've talked about this outside of these conversations. I'm the same. I stopped watching the news probably about, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years ago. So I can't be precise. It's when I started learning about this stuff. And actually, I started to realize that I don't need to know someone else's interpretation of what's going on in the world.
Exactly.
Because what I need to know is the sort of, I want to know the facts, but I don't need to know anyone else's interpretation. And then I came, sorry?
It's called mediation, isn't it?
Yeah,
when people do that.
Absolutely. And of course, you know, if you think about what, you know, one of the careers that is now promoted for particularly young people who, you know, don't want corporate jobs, is that in some way you can become an influencer in social media. You know, becoming an influencer in social media is about putting yourself in that mediation position and sort of offering yourself up as, you know, someone who can
do it or something, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. And you know, in a way, I guess what we're doing here is in that space, but it's not. Certainly, I'm not doing it because I want to be an influencer. I want to be.
We're not sponsored by anyone. So.
No. He says, wearing his boss cap. If only. But it's about trying to just like get rid of some of the fallacies and some of the misunderstandings, so that people can access different resources and help themselves break out of things. So coming back to the news and the negativity, so, you know, you were saying that, you know, people might click off on a woo-woo basis because you mentioned Michael Beckwith. So, you know, somebody that I was introduced to just a few years ago, and I still listen to and read today is someone called Abraham Hicks.
Yep.
That is woo-woo off the scale.
Similar, exactly.
However, one of the things that Abraham Hicks says is, you really, where you're trying to get to is the point where other people can say and do whatever they want to do, and it doesn't affect you.
Yeah.
It's like when you get to that point, then you know you've sort of reached your, I guess maturity is the best word for it, where you've reached that point of you are who you are, and you're comfortable in your own skin. You're not searching for something else. You're open.
Yeah.
You're not searching for validation. Yeah. You're open, but in that open, you know, you're prepared to have that vulnerability we were talking about again, you know, with Brené Brown, because you're not scared that someone can say something or do something or influence you, and therefore actually what you've developed is real inner strength and power. So what I do every now and again, and it tends to be a Saturday morning actually, because there's something I do on a Saturday morning, and I put the radio on a Saturday morning while I'm doing it. And
radio? Sorry, what's that?
Yeah, it's an old-fashioned thing.
Oh, okay.
And I let the news play, and I let the news play deliberately, and I have to say to myself, okay, you're going to let it play because you're not going to allow whatever else, you know, all the nonsense, the rubbish, the negativity, you're not going to allow it to get under your skin and to affect you.
Yeah. So you're just testing your resilience, almost like snake venom, isn't it? You know, building up your immunity to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think there's something else. If you sort of approach the news from the perspective that you've got to avoid it, then you're giving it a power over you. And I wouldn't have learned that if I hadn't been open to listening to someone like Abraham Hicks. You know, and it's like, and these people, they've got massive audience, you know, and some of them are like really successful business people.
Yeah.
So,
well, I hear you. I mean, I'm actually, so today on my agenda in my science experiment phase is another form of journaling, which is totally woo-woo,
Right.
Completely woo-woo, which I'd never come across. Really simple.
Yeah.
And happy to share it if you don't want the last
go for it.
person to click unsubscribe. But I do similar to the letting go letter, but it's also in that that ritual sense. But you have two glasses.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with this one. Two glasses.
Keep going. I might be.
And then you hold them up like that. No. And what you do is you take a post-it note and you write down your current position.
Okay.
Whatever that looks like. Yeah. And you stick it on the glass. Okay. One glass. And you fill the glass with water.
Right.
And then you write your future position on the other one and you put it on the other glass.
Right.
And then when you're happy with both post-its, you pour the water from the current position into the future position and then drink the water.
Okay. No, I've not heard of that one.
So there we go.
Right. Okay.
How woo-woo is that?
It's about as woo-woo as it gets, I think.
I know, exactly. But when I was reading it, it kind of made sense at the time, obviously.
Yeah.
I might have been tired. But I was reading it and I was actually, I can see the whole ritual process of consuming something, almost like an opposite of letting go.
Yes.
You're consuming it.
Yeah.
Okay, it was like a reverse engineered letting go letter.
Yeah.
But
I get that.
Actually, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
Only because, again, my view on this, right? The biggest point for me, write your current position and your future position on a post-it. We all know how big a post-it is. That means you have to be ultra concise about what it is you want.
Yeah.
And I thought that in itself is a really good exercise.
Yeah.
Just to be absolutely concise in terms of what you want. Yeah. And so I'm going to give it a go. Just for that challenge. I will drink the water, of course. It's a bit like burning the letting go letter. But,
sure.
But I can see I've lost you now.
No, you haven't. Absolutely not. No, I tell you, it wasn't that you'd lost me. What you did actually was connect me to something I did this morning, actually. So, I do a meditation every morning, and you sent me some meditations to look at. But I've also been reading a book called, in fact, I've been listening to the audio book, but I actually then started to read it this morning as well, called The Power of the Subconscious Mind. And one of the meditations was to think of one thing that you want.
Yeah.
Just to think of one thing that you want and get real clarity on that. And what hit me like a train coming in the other direction was actually, I've got loads of things that I want.
Yeah.
In different aspects. I've got things I want in business, things I want in personal life, things I want from a hobby perspective, all sorts of
all
things.
That stuff. Yeah.
And what it made me realize was actually how dragged I am in different directions.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, if I focus on that, that means I can't focus on that, and I can't focus on that, and of course, which brings us back to the idea of focus, and you get what you focused on, and one of the things I've always been interested in is people who become like hyper successful. My interest was really in sport, to be honest. That's where it came from.
Makes sense.
So I guess my best sport as a teenager was golf, and it was at the time when Nick Faldo was like superhero, like world's #1 golfer. But he had a terrible reputation from a media perspective. He wasn't very good at media relations. Ultimately, a bit of an irony, and they became one of America's like greatest golf pundits on TV. They really loved him. But in his early days, he didn't have good media relations, and he didn't know how to speak to the press to get the best results. And he didn't know how to relate to other players particularly well. So he was very much a loner. And I remember reading, I can't remember whether it was a biography or a sports report about him, but saying the real reason for that was he was hyper-focused, hyper-focused on his golf and being successful. And he is like one of the top 2 most successful British golfers ever. And like, there's no one even close to him. right? And then you see the same in someone like Andy Murray, right?
Yeah.
What it took Andy Murray, he had to become hyper focused, and
Yeah.
you know, in those early days, he didn't have a great reputation with the press and media relationships. Yeah,
No.
yeah. Or someone like David.
Since, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Someone like David Beckham. You know, it's like, you know, and he's developed by, you know, as his
presence. Yeah.
Yeah. But in the early days, all he was focused on was how to kick a ball the best he could. You know.
Yeah. You hear lots of stories about that as well, with him hanging tires up on, like, you know, crossbars and staying late, trying to get the ball through the tire, all that stuff. You know, it's over and above, isn't it?
And of course, you get the same in business, where you get these hyper focused people on business. And so that exercise really brought home to me, and I had to make a decision, actually. And that is, actually, I don't want to be hyper focused. I want to have some dimension. And if that means I've got to sacrifice being a billionaire businessman, then I'll sacrifice it, because actually I want breadth in my life. I don't just want to have one dimension to my life. And that's my choice, right? That's my choice. I'm not saying it's the right choice for everybody, but that is my choice. But being able to make that choice because of these mental exercises, the meditations,
you're doing it consciously, aren't you?
It's a very empowering thing.
Because it's a conscious choice then. Absolutely. There is a focus question, so I don't know how we're doing for time, but
I think we got a couple of minutes.
Okay. But my final thought for the day is a focus question, which is really useful when you're journaling and when you're coming up with goals as well. And so this is a really tough question to answer. And that is, what's the one thing I can do which in doing makes everything else easier or unnecessary? And what you do is you put something in there. So what's the one thing I can do for my physical health, which in doing so makes everything else easier or unnecessary? And then you can apply it to any facet of your life, any dimension of your life.
I love that.
It actually seems really easy. Now I've said it. It's really, really difficult to answer. Really difficult to answer.
Yeah.
And it's a focus question.
No, it's great. I love that. I think my last thought for this session is actually, and it's something I've referred to before, is this is not new. This is very, very old human knowledge. You can trace it back 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years, you know, back to the early philosophers from Greece, from China, from Japan. And the originations of those philosophies, of course, is what sort of went through into the evolution of the Bible or the Quran, and you know, obviously what then happened, how those teachings have been subverted by people for religious means. This is why I have a problem with religion as opposed to spirituality. But it's very, very old, and like it's not. It's like every culture knew this. So we've talked about this before. One of my favorite stories is from the Native American Indian cultures, where they talk about having the white wolf and the black wolf. And if you're listening to this and you don't know that story, Google it. You know, the story of the white wolf and the black wolf, and the son says to the father, which one wins in the fight? And the father says, it's the one that you feed. And ultimately, that's really what we've been talking about today. And the way you feed, the white wolf, the good wolf, so that's the one that wins out in your head, is journaling.
Yeah, absolutely.